Have you ever wondered why Frieza, the most powerful being in the universe, feels the need to destroy entire planets? Why does someone so strong need to prove his superiority so desperately? The truth is disturbing. Behind that sadistic smile and calm voice lies a being completely dominated by fear. Yes, fear. Frieza doesn't destroy for pleasure, he destroys out of terror. Terror of being surpassed, terror of losing control, terror of having his true weakness discovered. Every planet he blows up, every race he exterminates, every warrior he humiliates, all of this is a desperate attempt to hide the emptiness within him. And you know what's scariest? This behavior isn't limited to anime. There are real people around you acting exactly like Frieza right now. Let's delve into the mind of Dragon Ball's most iconic tyrant and discover what psychology reveals about his true nature. Before we continue unraveling the dark secrets of Frieza's mind, I need to make a quick request of you. Subscribe to the channel and like it now. Do you know why? Because what you'll discover in the next few minutes will completely change the way you view anime villains and, most importantly, the people around you. This content on anime psychology is rare, and if you miss the next videos, you'll be left without understanding the deeper behaviors of the characters you love. Each analysis we do here is unique, and your like helps this knowledge reach more people who need to understand these psychological patterns. So click the red subscribe button, activate the bell, leave a like, and together we'll discover what really hides behind the most feared emperor in the universe. Let's start from the beginning. Who is Frieza? He presents himself as the emperor of the universe, a supreme being who controls entire galaxies with just a flick of his finger. But psychology teaches us something fundamental. The more someone needs to prove they're powerful, the less confident they truly are inside. And Frieza is the perfect example of this. Think about it. Frieza was born with absurd power. He didn't need to train, he didn't need to fight to achieve anything. Everything was handed to him on a silver platter. And do you know what happens psychologically to someone who never had to build anything? This person develops what psychologists call a fragile identity. Frieza's identity isn't based on real achievements, on overcoming obstacles, on growth. It's based solely on being naturally superior. And that's extremely dangerous. Why is it dangerous? Because when your identity depends solely on a trait you didn't create, you live in constant fear of losing it. Imagine waking up every day knowing your sole reason for existence is to be the strongest, but also knowing you didn't earn it, it was just genetic luck. This creates a deep existential anxiety. Frieza doesn't sleep peacefully. He's obsessed with the possibility that someone, somewhere in the universe, might be stronger than him. And that's precisely where Frieza's most revealing behavior comes in: preemptive destruction. When he hears the legend of the Super Saiyan, what's his first reaction? He doesn't investigate, he doesn't try to understand, he doesn't seek challenges to grow. No. He commits genocide. He destroys the entire planet Vegeta, killing millions of Saiyans, including women, children, and the elderly who could never threaten him. This isn't the behavior of someone confident. This is the behavior of someone absolutely terrified. In psychology, we call this annihilation defense. It's when a person feels so threatened by something that their only response is to try to completely destroy that source of threat. It's not enough to defeat the enemy, it's necessary to ensure that they can never exist again. Frieza doesn't just want to be the strongest, he wants to be the only strong one. Because if he's the only one at the top, there's no comparison, no competition, no possibility of defeat. But let's go even deeper. Notice how Frieza behaves during fights. He always starts by underestimating his opponents, making jokes, acting dismissively. "You're insects, you're not worth my time, I'll only use a fraction of my power." Why does he do this? Is it just arrogance? No. It's psychological compensation. When someone is genuinely confident in their superiority, they don't need to constantly remind others of it. You don't see a lion proving to gazelles that it's dangerous. The lion simply is dangerous and everyone knows it. But Frieza needs to constantly verbalize his superiority because deep down he doesn't fully believe it. Every insult, every exaggerated display of power, every humiliation he inflicts on his enemies is an attempt to convince himself that he truly is invincible. And there's more. Note that Frieza does have transformations, but he spends his entire life in his weakest form. Why? Because he imprisoned his own power. This is fascinating from a psychological standpoint. Frieza is so afraid of his own potential that he literally limits himself. His transformations aren't power-ups like the heroes, they're reductions. His final form is his true form, and all the others are suppressed forms he created to control his power. What does this reveal? That Frieza is even afraid of himself. He doesn't trust his ability to control his own power, so he imprisons himself. This is a perfect parallel to people who are afraid of their own success, who sabotage themselves before reaching their full potential because, subconsciously, they fear they won't be able to handle the responsibilities and expectations that come with that success. Now let's talk about Frieza's relationships with others. Does he have friends? No. Does he have trusted allies? No. Does he have family he respects? No. Frieza is completely emotionally isolated. Everyone around him is either a tool or a threat. There's no middle ground. Zarbon, Dodoria, the Jinyu Force, they're all expendable in his eyes. The moment they fail, they're eliminated without hesitation. This pattern reveals something psychology calls an inability for true intimacy. People with this trait cannot form genuine emotional connections because it would require vulnerability, and vulnerability is unacceptable for someone who has built their entire identity on the idea of being invulnerable. Frieza cannot afford to trust anyone because trust is a form of weakness in his eyes. And if there's one thing Frieza hates more than anything, it's weakness, especially the possibility of weakness within himself. Let's now analyze the most revealing moment of the entire saga, when Goku transforms into a Super Saiyan. Frieza's reaction isn't that of a confident warrior who's finally met a worthy challenge. No. He goes into absolute panic. He starts screaming, shaking, his eyes widen in pure terror. What? Because in that moment, his worst nightmare came true. The legend he'd tried to erase from the universe materialized right in front of him. And more than that, it proved him right to be afraid all along. This is the cruel paradox of paranoia. When you act on fear, you often create the conditions for what you fear to become reality. If Frieza hadn't destroyed planet Vegeta, Goku would never have been sent to Earth, never would have grown as he did, never would have developed the bonds that transformed him into the warrior who defeated Frieza. Frieza's own fear planted the seeds of his destruction. And even after being defeated, what does Frieza do? He returns as Mecha Frieza, obsessed with revenge on Goku. He hasn't learned anything, hasn't evolved, hasn't transformed internally. He's only become more desperate, more obsessed, more consumed by hatred. And when he returns again in Dragon Ball Super, after years in hell, what's the first thing he does? He trains obsessively not to become better, but to destroy Goku. His entire existence revolves around denying that defeat, proving it was an accident, a lucky break. This demonstrates something profound about unresolved trauma and wounded egos. Frieza can't process his defeat because accepting that he lost would mean accepting that his entire identity was false. It would mean admitting that he was never invincible, that he was always vulnerable, that all the fear he tried to hide was justified. And this is unbearable for him. So he prefers to live eternally trapped in this cycle of revenge and obsession rather than face the truth about himself. Now let's connect Frieza's behavior with deeper psychological concepts that will help you understand not only the character, but also real people you know. Frieza is a classic example of what we call narcissistic personality disorder taken to the extreme. But be careful, I'm not saying he's just selfish or conceited. Pathological narcissism is much more complex and darker than that. A pathological narcissist lives in a specific mental prison. They must maintain a grandiose image of themselves at all costs because beneath this mask lies a terrifying emptiness. Frieza isn't cruel because he enjoys being cruel. He's cruel because cruelty is the only language he knows to feel real, to feel powerful, to fill that inner void that consumes him. Let's unravel the specific behaviors. First, the pathological need for admiration and submission. Notice how Frieza demands that everyone bow before him, not just physically but emotionally. When someone dares to verbally challenge him, even if they pose no real threat, Frieza reacts with disproportionate violence. What? Because for the narcissist, any questioning of his grandiosity is an existential threat. It's not just wounded pride, it's the entire structure of his psyche that begins to crumble. Second, revealing behavior, a complete inability to feel empathy. When Frieza exterminates the Namekians, he shows no internal conflict, no hesitation, no remorse. He kills children, elders, and destroys entire villages in pursuit of the Dragon Balls, yet this causes him absolutely nothing more than a mild annoyance at wasting time. This complete lack of empathy isn't just evil, it's a structural inability to recognize other beings as having intrinsic value. For Frieza, other people aren't people, they're objects. They're extensions of his personal universe that must function according to his will. When they function, he ignores them. When they stop functioning, he discards them. There's no real relationship, only absolute utilitarianism. And this creates a specific kind of loneliness, the loneliness of the king who has thousands of subjects but no true companion. But here's the most disturbing insight. Deep down, Frieza knows he's empty. There's a telling scene when he's about to destroy Namek. He could simply destroy the planet and leave, but he doesn't. He makes a point of telling Goku that he's going to make him suffer, that he's going to destroy everything he loves, that he's going to ensure he dies in despair. Why this need to make the other suffer emotionally and not just die? Because deep down, Frieza envies those who have real emotional connections. When he sees Goku fighting to protect his friends, when he sees Gohan motivated by his father's love, when he sees Vegeta finally finding something greater than himself to fight for, it enrages Frieza. It's not just a threat to his power, it's a threat to the narrative he's built that emotional connections are weakness. If he admits these connections have value, then he'll have to admit he's lived an empty and meaningless life. And that's psychologically impossible for him to process. So what does he do? He tries to destroy these connections. He kills Krillin in front of Goku specifically to cause maximum emotional pain. He tries to make Goku give up by showing that friendship is worthless in the face of absolute power. But here's the cruel irony. It's precisely this pain, this deep emotional connection, that awakens the Super Saiyan in Goku. Goku's greatest strength comes from the very thing Frieza most despises and secretly envies. Let's now talk about another fascinating aspect: Frieza's pathological perfectionism. When he returns in Dragon Ball Super, he says something revealing: "I've never trained a single day in my life because I've never needed to." This isn't a statement of strength, it's a statement of fear. Frieza was so afraid of discovering he might have limits that he chose never to test them. It's like someone who's afraid to try something new because, if they try and fail, they'll have to admit they're not perfect. This type of perfectionism doesn't seek excellence. It seeks to maintain the illusion of being infallible. The difference is crucial. Those who seek excellence embrace the process, the mistakes, the growth. Those who seek to maintain the illusion of perfection avoid any situation where they might be truly tested. Frieza spent his entire life choosing battles he knew he would win, destroying civilizations that stood no chance against him, avoiding any real confrontation with his limitations. And when he's finally forced to confront his limitations on Namek, the whole house of cards crumbles. He goes through transformations, each more desperate than the last, until he reaches his final form, where he vows to use 100% of his power. And even then it's not enough. And what happens then? He literally self-destructs. That final attack that cuts him in half doesn't come from Goku, it comes from Frieza's own energy disk. Perfect psychological symbolism. In the end, Frieza's greatest enemy has always been himself. Let's connect this with a concept everyone should understand: the difference between genuine strength and compensatory power. Goku has genuine strength, he trains, fights, loses, learns, grows. His power comes from a real process of development. Frieza has compensatory power. He was born with strength and uses that strength to compensate for his inner emptiness, to hide his lack of true identity, so he never has to look within and see that there's nothing there. This distinction is crucial because it explains why, no matter how many times Frieza trains or gains new powers, he always loses in the end. It's not a matter of power numbers, it's a matter of psychological foundation. A house built on sand, no matter how high you build it, will fall. A house built on solid rock may start out smaller, but has infinite potential for growth. Goku is the rock, Frieza is the sand. Another destructive pattern of Frieza's: the inability to learn from mistakes. This is characteristic of pathological narcissists. When something goes wrong, it's never their fault. It's always the universe conspiring against them, always betrayal, always something external. Frieza never says, "I underestimated my opponent and need to change my approach." He says, "That lowly ape got lucky and I'll fix it by crushing him." This refusal to process failures as opportunities for growth creates a vicious cycle. The person repeats the same mistakes over and over because they never take responsibility for them. Frieza continues to underestimate Goku, continues to underestimate the Saiyans, continues to believe he can win with brute force alone, and continues to lose precisely because of this. But admitting his approach is flawed would mean admitting imperfection, and that's unacceptable to his psyche. There's also the phenomenon psychologists call catastrophic emotional regulation. Healthy people can handle frustration proportionately. Frieza? He goes from zero to genocide in seconds. Someone dares to speak to him in a way he considers disrespectful? Instant death. Someone fails a mission? Torture and public execution. This inability to regulate emotions reveals an extreme emotional fragility hidden beneath his apparent coldness. His name, by the way, is perfect: Frieza, frozen. He's emotionally frozen, incapable of feeling real human warmth, incapable of connection, incapable of vulnerability. And he's turned this emotional deficiency into an identity, a trademark. I'm cold, I'm calculating, I don't care about anything. But that's not strength, it's a scar he's turned into armor. And you know what's sadder? Frieza could have chosen differently. In Dragon Ball Super, there's a moment where Goku offers him a hand, literally offering him a chance to change, to grow, to become something beyond the monster he is. And Frieza? He immediately betrays Goku, trying to kill him behind his back. Because accepting help would mean admitting he needs help, and admitting need is the greatest weakness possible in his twisted mind. Now I need to hear from you. We've reached a crucial point in the analysis and I really want to know, what are your thoughts so far? Leave your comment. Have you noticed these patterns in real people around you? Do you know someone who acts like Frieza, destroying everything around them to hide their own insecurities? Or perhaps you've fallen into some of these behaviors at some point in your life. Don't be ashamed, we all have shadows. Share your story, your reflections, your questions. This helps me a lot to continue bringing you in-depth content like this. Your comments show me that this work is worthwhile. Now we'll delve into even deeper territory, Frieza's relationship with the concepts of death and immortality. This will reveal psychological layers you've probably never noticed. When Frieza goes to Namek, what is his true goal? The Dragon Balls. And what does he want? Immortality. Not more power, not more dominance, but immortality. What? Because deep within Frieza's mind lies a primordial terror, the fear of death, but not ordinary physical death. He fears the death of his ego, the end of his existence as the supreme being. The immortality he seeks isn't just biological, it's existential. He wants to ensure that forever, eternally, he will be the emperor, the strongest, the center of the universe. This reveals a deep existential anxiety that he spends his entire life trying to deny. Let's connect this with the philosophical and psychological concept of the terror of mortality. Ernest Becker, a famous psychologist, wrote an entire book about how human beings build elaborate defenses against the fear of death. Some create legacies, others lose themselves in work, others seek fame. Frieza? He seeks absolute power and literal immortality. It's the most extreme defense possible. If I cannot be defeated and I cannot die, then I need not face my finitude, my vulnerability, my insignificance in the infinite cosmos. But here's the cruel paradox. By seeking immortality, Frieza demonstrates that he is obsessed with death. He thinks about it constantly, plans against it, structures his entire existence around avoiding it. People who have truly made peace with their mortality don't need immortality. They live fully in the present, create meaningful connections, and leave legacies through their impact on other lives. But Frieza can't do any of these things because he's trapped in denial. And there's a fascinating psychological detail. After Frieza actually dies and goes to hell, what does he do there? He hangs in a cocoon, forced to listen to angelic voices singing happy songs. This is literally his hell. Not fire, not physical torture. Frieza's hell is being forced to confront purity, kindness, genuine happiness, everything he destroyed in himself. It's an eternal mirror showing what he could have been but chose not to be. This brings us to another crucial concept, the difference between regret and resentment. When Frieza returns to life, he shows no regret for anything he did. Zero. He shows resentment for having been defeated. This is a fundamental psychological distinction. Regret comes from recognizing that you made wrong choices and wishing you had acted differently. Resentment comes from blaming the world for not accepting your wrong choices. Frieza doesn't think, I made mistakes and I need to change. He thinks, the universe made a mistake in defeating me and I need to fix it. It's a complete reversal of responsibility. And do you know what this creates? A mental prison from which he can never escape. Because if the problem is always outside, the solution is also always outside, always unattainable, always thwarted by external forces. He's placed himself in a narrative where he's eternally the victim persecuted by an unjust universe, despite being literally a genocidal maniac. Let's now talk about his relationship with his father, King Cold. Here we have crucial clues about how Frieza became who he is. King Cold raised Frieza to be a conqueror, a weapon, an extension of the family empire. There's no evidence of real love there, only expectations of power and dominance. Frieza was never loved for who he was, only for what he represented. This creates what psychologists call internalized conditional love. Frieza learned from a young age that his worth depends entirely on his power. If he's strong, he has value. If he's weak, he doesn't deserve to exist. This programming is devastating because it creates an endless, unfulfillable quest. No matter how much power you accumulate, it's never enough, because you're trying to fill a void that can't be filled with power. You're trying to earn a love that should have been unconditional. And notice what happens when King Cold dies. Frieza shows no real emotion. His father was cut in half by Trunks, and Frieza's reaction is merely tactical anger, not grief. What? Because there was never any real emotional connection there. It was merely a strategic alliance between two narcissists using each other. King Cold's death doesn't leave Frieza any more alone than he already was, because he's always been deeply alone, even surrounded by people. This leads us to explore the concept of existential loneliness versus social isolation. Social isolation is being physically alone. Existential loneliness is being emotionally disconnected even in the midst of crowds. Frieza has an entire army, entire planets under his command, soldiers who respond to his every order. But he is existentially alone because he lacks the capacity for genuine connection. Every interaction is transactional, manipulative, and superficial. And do you know what psychological research shows? Prolonged existential loneliness literally changes the structure of the brain. It increases paranoia, increases aggression, decreases empathy, and distorts threat perception. People begin to see enemies where none exist, conspiracies where there is only chance, challenges where there are only differences. Frieza's brain has been shaped by decades, perhaps centuries, of chosen existential loneliness. He's not just cruel, he's neurologically incapable of functioning otherwise at this point. But here's something that will blow your mind. In Dragon Ball Super, there's one moment where Frieza acts out of character. One single moment. When he returns and fights alongside Goku in the Tournament of Power. For a very brief moment, he experiences what it's like to fight alongside someone instead of against or over them. And there's a scene where he even smiles. Not his usual sadistic smile, but something that almost seems genuine. What does this show? That deep, deep down, there still exists a tiny spark of possibility for change. It's not that Frieza actively chooses to be a monster every second, it's that he's trapped in neurological and psychological patterns so deep that change seems impossible. It's like someone who's drowning but has completely forgotten how to swim. The water is there, the surface is visible, but the movements necessary to reach it are beyond the person's current capacity. Let's now talk about psychological projection, one of Frieza's favorite defense mechanisms. Projection is when you attribute characteristics of yourself to others that you don't want to acknowledge. Frieza constantly calls others weak, pathetic, and unworthy. But who is he really talking about? The parts of himself he hates and can't accept. When he calls Goku a stupid monkey, he's projecting his own feelings of inadequacy. When he calls the Namekians insignificant insects, he's projecting his own fear of insignificance. Every insult he hurls is a distorted mirror of his own insecurities. And the saddest part? He doesn't realize he's doing it. The projection works precisely because it's unconscious. There's also the mechanism of splitting, seeing the world in absolute black and white. For Frieza, there are only two categories of beings: he who is superior and everyone else who is trash. There is no nuance, no complexity, no possibility of relative value. This rigid division is characteristic of deeply fragmented personalities who cannot tolerate ambiguity or emotional complexity. And this leads to specific self-destructive behaviors. When something doesn't fit neatly into his worldview, Frieza has to destroy it immediately. He can't tolerate evidence that his vision is wrong. This is why he reacts so violently when challenged. It's not just his bruised ego, it's that each challenge threatens the entire cognitive framework through which he processes reality. Now, please stay until the end of this video because I'm about to reveal the most disturbing aspect of all about Frieza, a psychological trait that connects him to real people you definitely know, and that could be wreaking havoc on someone close to you right now. What I'm going to explain in the next few minutes can literally help you identify and protect yourself from toxic and destructive relationships. You won't want to miss it. Let's now unravel the darkest and most disturbing aspect of Frieza's psychology: sadism as an emotional regulation mechanism. Pay attention to this because it's crucial. Frieza doesn't inflict pain on others just because he's bad. He inflicts pain because it's the only way he's found to feel alive, to feel in control, to experience something approaching genuine emotion. Think of all the scenes where Frieza tortures his opponents. He doesn't kill them quickly even when he could. He goes slowly, calculatedly, observing every expression of pain, every scream, every tear. He's drinking in it. What? Because in the deep emotional void where he exists, the suffering of others is the only thing that elicits an emotional response in him. It's the only thing that makes him feel anything other than the constant emptiness. This is what psychology calls functional sadism. It's not sadistic pleasure in the usual sense we imagine. It's deeper and sadder than that. It's a person so dead inside that they can only feel real through the destruction of others. The suffering they cause is like a distorted mirror that reflects back to them confirmation that they exist, that they have power, that they have an impact on the universe. Let's connect this to neuroscience. When a healthy person sees another person in pain, specific neurons called mirror neurons are activated, creating an empathic experience of discomfort. This is why we cringe when we see someone hurting themselves. But in extremely narcissistic and sadistic personalities, these circuits are either atrophied or have been reprogrammed to produce feelings of pleasure or satisfaction instead of discomfort. In Frieza's case, decades of conscious choices to suppress empathy, to distance himself emotionally, to see others merely as objects, have literally reconfigured his neurology. Through behavioral repetition, he's created a brain that functions fundamentally differently from a healthy brain. And at this point, he's trapped in this configuration. Change would be possible, but it would require such a conscious effort that it's beyond his ability or willingness. Now let's talk about something that will make you look at Frieza from a completely different perspective. His relationship with aesthetics and appearance. Notice how obsessively clean, polished, and almost aseptic he is. There's not a scratch on his armor, not a single thread missing. Everything is perfectly controlled. This isn't just vanity, it's an obsession with control that manifests itself physically. People with deep vulnerability trauma often develop obsessive rituals of control over superficial aspects of life. If I can't control my inner feelings, I'll perfectly control my outer appearance. If I can't deal with the emotional chaos within me, I'll create absolute order outside of myself. Frieza's flawless armor is both literally and metaphorically a barrier between his true fragmented self and the outside world. And there's a detail few notice. When Frieza is losing, when he's truly being overpowered, the first thing that happens is that this perfect facade begins to crack. His armor breaks, he becomes dirty, bloody, and disheveled. And this infuriates him more than the physical injuries. Why? Because the loss of visual control is the outward symbol of the loss of internal control he spent his entire life denying. Let's now explore a specific behavioral pattern that connects Frieza to real-life abusers in the world. The promised disappointment punishment cycle. Here's how it works. Frieza promises his subordinates rewards for loyalty. He promises planets, riches, power. But when these subordinates actually succeed, what happens? Frieza feels threatened and punishes or discards them. Dodoria and Zarbon serve Frieza faithfully for years. And what do they gain? Death without hesitation the moment they fail even once. The Jinyu Force, considered the elite of Frieza's army, is treated as expendable the moment they fail to defeat the heroes. Even Vegeta, who was practically raised as Frieza's son in a twisted way, is treated with disdain and is constantly threatened with death. This pattern creates what psychologists call bonding trauma. Frieza's subordinates live in a constant state of anxiety, never knowing whether they will be rewarded or punished, which keeps them hypervigilant and desperately trying to please. It's the same pattern seen in abusive relationships. The abuser gives occasional crumbs of approval to keep the victim trapped, but never provides real security. And this brings us to a crucial point. Frieza is incapable of seeing others prosper. He can't tolerate the success of others, even when that success benefits him. When his soldiers achieve victories, instead of celebrating, he downplays, ridicules, or finds fault. Why? Because in his mental model, there is only a finite amount of superiority in the universe. If someone else is rising, it means he is falling. It's a zero-sum game where any gains to others are interpreted as his personal loss. This reveals something about the scarcity versus abundance mindset. Secure people operate from an abundance mindset. They celebrate others' success because they understand that success isn't a limited resource. Frieza operates from an extreme scarcity mindset. He believes there's only room for one at the top, so everyone else needs to be kept down. But here's the cruel trick. This mindset ensures he'll always be alone, always paranoid, always defending a throne no one else even wants to challenge. Let's now talk about how Frieza deals with the concept of change. For him, change is synonymous with weakness. He mocks Goku for constantly seeking new transformations, new levels of power. You need so many different forms because you're weak, he says. But what does this really reveal? It reveals that Frieza is terrified by the idea of evolution, of growth, of genuine transformation. Why? Because change requires admitting that your previous self was imperfect, incomplete. Frieza built his entire identity on the idea of already being perfect, already complete. So any change would be an admission that he was wrong, that he wasn't perfect all along. And this is psychologically impossible for him to process. So he remains stuck, stagnant, eternally repeating the same patterns, while the world around him evolves and leaves him behind. There's a Carl Jungian concept that applies perfectly to Frieza: the shadow. The shadow in Jungian psychology is the part of ourselves that we repress, deny, and hide. The more you deny your shadow, the more power it has over you in unconscious ways. Frieza completely denies any vulnerability, any fear, any need. And what happens? These denied aspects control everything he does. He's not acting from a position of strength. He's reacting from a position of denied weakness. His every decision is dictated by fears he won't admit to. Every action is an attempt to prove something to himself. He's not free. He's the most imprisoned being in the universe, bound by invisible chains of denial and repression. And there's something even deeper. Frieza has never had a genuine wake-up call. Even after all the defeats, all the humiliations, all the time in hell, he comes back exactly the same. There's no growth, no wisdom gained, no, maybe I should rethink my approach to life moment. What? Because he's in such deep denial that he's capable of reinterpreting any experience in a way that confirms his original narrative. This is what psychologists call pathological confirmation bias. No matter what happens, Frieza finds a way to interpret it that keeps his worldview intact. Did he lose? It was betrayal, it was luck, it was circumstance. It's never a true reflection of his choices or character. This infinite capacity for self-deception is both his greatest strength, because it keeps him functioning, and his greatest weakness, because it prevents any real growth. Let's now connect with something we all face at some level: cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is the mental discomfort we feel when our actions contradict our beliefs. Healthy people resolve this by changing their actions or beliefs to align them. Frieza resolves this by distorting reality until the contradiction no longer exists in his mind. Does he believe he's superior? Then any defeat wasn't a real defeat, it was an accident. Does he believe emotions are weakness? Then the consuming rage he constantly feels isn't emotion, it's justice, or necessary correction. Does he believe he doesn't need anyone? Then his subordinates aren't necessities, they're tools he chooses to use. Every contradiction is repackaged to fit his narrative. This level of denial requires immense mental energy. Frieza is constantly, unconsciously working to maintain the illusion. It's like holding a beach ball underwater. It requires constant effort, and the moment you relax, the truth comes out. That's why he's always tense, always alert, always ready to destroy anything that threatens to puncture his bubble of illusion. And herein lies the ultimate tragedy. Frieza could be free. At any moment he could choose to stop, look honestly at himself, acknowledge the pain, process the trauma, and begin the work of becoming a whole and genuine being. But this path requires the one thing he lacks: the courage to be vulnerable. Ironic, right? The most powerful being in the universe doesn't have the courage a 5-year-old has when admitting they're scared or sad. Now let's dive into something that will connect everything: how Frieza relates to the concept of identity. Who is Frieza when you take away his power? When you take away his title of emperor? When you take away the fear he inspires? The answer is terrifying. There's nothing left. There's no genuine self beneath the mask. The mask is all there is. This is what we call dependent external identity. Healthy people have an internal identity. They know who they are, independent of titles, possessions, or power. I am compassionate. I value honesty. I seek growth. These are internal traits that exist independently of external circumstances. But Frieza? His entire identity is, I am the strongest. Take that away from him, and he literally no longer exists as a coherent being. And this perfectly explains why defeat destroys him so completely. It's not just that he lost a fight, it's that he lost himself. If he's not the strongest, then who is he? This question has no answer in his psyche, so he collapses completely. The rage he displays isn't just frustration, it's pure existential terror. It's a being staring into the abyss of non-being and realizing there's no ground beneath it. Let's now explore something fascinating about how Frieza uses language. Notice how he rarely uses collective pronouns. He doesn't say we conquered, he says I conquered. He doesn't say my army won, he says I won. Even when thousands of soldiers are doing the work, in Frieza's narrative, everything is attributed solely to him. What? Because acknowledging the contributions of others would mean admitting dependence, and dependence is unacceptable. So he literally rewrites reality in his own language to eliminate any recognition that others played a role in any success. But here's the cruel paradox. By doing so, he deprives himself of the possibility of true satisfaction. When you can't acknowledge that you worked with others, You also can't experience the joy of shared achievement. And there's more. Frieza frequently uses the third person to talk about himself. You dare defy Lord Frieza? Lord Frieza does not tolerate insubordination. This isn't just arrogance, it's dissociation. He's so disconnected from any humanity, or in his case, genuine alienity, that he speaks of himself as if he were a separate entity, almost an impersonal deity. It's a way of further distancing himself from any emotional vulnerability. Let's now talk about an aspect that few analyze: Frieza's relationship with the concept of justice. In his mind, everything he does is just and deserved. When he destroys a planet, it's not genocide, it's appropriate punishment for defiance. When he tortures someone, it's not cruelty, it's a necessary lesson. Does he truly believe this, or is it just lip service? The answer is complicated. He kind of believes it. Frieza has spent so much time creating narratives justifying his actions that these narratives have become indistinguishable from the reality he perceives. It's like a liar who tells the same lie so many times that he begins to believe it. He's constructed an entire moral system where he is always the just judge and everyone else is always the criminal deserving of punishment. This kind of moral distortion is especially dangerous because it comes with genuine conviction. Frieza doesn't act like a villain who knows he's doing evil. He acts like a judge who believes he's upholding cosmic order. And this makes him all the more ruthless because there's no doubt, no hesitation, no internal conflict. In his mind, every atrocity is morally justified, even necessary. Let's connect this to the concept of moral disengagement. Psychologist Albert Bandura identified several mechanisms through which good people do terrible things: dehumanizing victims, assigning blame to victims, diffusing responsibility, euphemistic language, and advantageous comparisons. Frieza uses all of these mechanisms simultaneously. He dehumanizes by calling others insects and monkeys. He assigns blame by saying they provoked or deserved it. He uses euphemistic language, calling genocide cleansing or correction. He compares himself favorably by saying that at least he gives chances before killing. How generous, huh? Each of these mechanisms allows him to commit atrocities without psychological distress. Now let's explore something truly disturbing: Frieza's ability to compartmentalize. Compartmentalization is when you separate aspects of your life into mental boxes that don't communicate with each other. This allows someone to be a loving father at home and a torturer at work without seeing any contradiction. Frieza uses this, but in an even more extreme way. He can be completely calm, even polite, one moment, and the next he can be committing extreme violence and then return to calm as if nothing had happened. There's no emotional transition. It's as if different versions of him exist in parallel, and he alternates between them without any emotional continuity. This is a sign of profound psychological fragmentation. Healthy people have emotional continuity. You might get angry, but there's a transition. You gradually calm down, process what happened, integrate the experience. Frieza? He might be torturing someone, stop mid-sentence to make a casual remark about wine, and then continue torturing in the same tone of voice. There's no integration, no processing, no continuity. Each moment is isolated from the next. Let's now talk about something that will make you rethink many scenes: Frieza and the concept of audience. Note that many of his cruelties are performative. He insists that others see them. He announces what he's going to do before he does it. He explains why he's doing it while he's doing it. Why? Because it's not enough for the victim to suffer. Everyone needs to know that he has the power to make them suffer. This is what we call systematic psychological terrorism. It's not just about the act of violence. It's about creating an atmosphere of terror where everyone lives in constant fear. Every public execution, every display of power, every announcement of intentions is calculated to maximize not physical damage, but collective psychological damage. He wants everyone to live with the constant knowledge that he can destroy them at any moment. And you know what this creates? A psychological prison where people police themselves. They stop doing things not because Frieza is actively preventing them, but because they've internalized their fear of him. It's effective control because it doesn't require constant effort. You create the terror once, dramatically enough, and then people control themselves. It's psychological manipulation on a galactic scale. It also has the appearance of what we call a sadistic power play. Frieza often gives his opponents false hope. He pretends to be in trouble, lets them think they're winning, and then reveals he was just playing. Why do this? Because the ultimate cruelty isn't taking away hope from the start, it's giving hope and then crushing it. Just when Vegeta thinks he's finally going to defeat Frieza, just when he's hopeful, vulnerable, believing in victory, in that moment Frieza reveals he wasn't even trying. The despair that comes from shattered hope is infinitely deeper than constant despair. It's calculated, it's refined, it's cruelty elevated to a dark art form. Now let's look at something that connects all of this with modern neuroscience. Frieza's reward system is completely broken. In healthy brains, dopamine is released when you achieve goals, when you create connections, when you experience positive novelty. But in people with Frieza's traumas and distortions, the reward system only responds to extreme stimuli. That's why he needs ever-increasing violence, ever more dramatic displays of power, ever more absolute conquests. He's chasing a high that becomes increasingly difficult to achieve because his brain is desensitized. It's literally an addiction to power, to dominance, to instilling fear. And like any addiction, he needs more and more to feel the same effect. And here's the saddest part. This addiction is killing his soul, metaphorically. Each time he acts like this, the neural circuits for this response strengthen, and the circuits for alternative behaviors atrophy. Over time, he literally loses the neurological capacity to feel satisfaction in healthy ways. Even if he wanted to change at this point, the road back would be immensely difficult because he's rewired his brain. This isn't an excuse for his behavior. He made choices that led to this. But it is an explanation. Understanding isn't forgiving, it's recognizing how someone gets to this point. And this is crucial because there are people in the real world following this same path right now. Small choices of cruelty, small moments of choosing power over connection, small times saying, I deserve to do this because I'm special. With enough repetition, these small steps lead to the abyss where Frieza exists. Let's now explore something that will completely change how you view not only Frieza, but also the people around him. The concept of compensatory grandiosity. This is a technical term that describes when someone develops an inflated self-image specifically to compensate for deep-seated feelings of inferiority. And Frieza is the perfect example of this in action. Think about it. If Frieza truly believed deeply that he was superior, he wouldn't need to constantly prove it. Lions don't need to prove they're lions. The sun doesn't need to prove it shines. But Frieza? He constantly, incessantly, obsessively needs to demonstrate, declare, and prove his superiority. This isn't a sign of certainty, it's a sign of deep doubt being violently suppressed. There's a psychological theory called true self versus false self, developed by Donald Winnicott. The true self is who you really are, with vulnerabilities, needs, and imperfections. The false self is a mask created to protect the true self from harm. In healthy development, these two parts eventually integrate. But in cases like Frieza's, the false self completely consumes the true self until it's unclear where one ends and the other begins. Lord Frieza, Emperor of the Universe, is the false self, an elaborate construct, a psychological armor. But who is the true self underneath? Probably a terrified child who never felt loved for who he truly was, only for the power he represented. A child who learned that vulnerability means destruction, so he buried all vulnerability so deep that he forgot it existed. And here's something that will make you see Frieza's scenes differently. Every outburst of rage is actually a trauma flashback. When he loses control, when he starts screaming and attacking randomly, he's not in the present. He's reliving some primordial moment of helplessness that's been seared into his psyche. All that anger isn't about Goku or the current situation. It's about something much older and deeper that was never resolved. Let's now explore Frieza's relationship with the concept of authenticity. Are there rare moments when his mask slips? Yes, there is one, when he's absolutely terrified. When the Super Saiyan appears, for a split second, you see in his face not the Emperor, but a terrified child. That is the true self leaking through the cracks of the false self. And you know what's most telling? Frieza hates that moment. He hates that anyone saw that flash of genuine fear. That's why his obsession with Goku is so personal and visceral. Goku didn't just defeat Frieza physically, he sees something Frieza spent a lifetime hiding. He saw the fear, the weakness, the vulnerability. And that's unforgivable to Frieza, even more so than the defeat itself. Let's now talk about a specific pattern called the narcissistic abuse cycle, and how Frieza perfectly demonstrates it. The cycle has phases: idealization, where the narcissist makes you feel special; devaluation, where they begin to criticize and belittle you; and discard, where they abandon or destroy you when you no longer serve their purposes. Frieza does this to literally everyone around him. Look at how he treats Vegeta. Initially, there's a phase of relative favoritism. Vegeta is kept alive, given missions, and given a certain status. But this isn't because Frieza cares, it's because Vegeta is useful. The moment Vegeta begins to question, begins to challenge, begins to show independence, Frieza immediately switches to devaluation and then attempts to discard him through murder. It's the whole cycle happening in slow motion. And there's a crucial psychological detail here. Frieza never chooses subordinates who can truly threaten him. The Ginyu Force is strong but not strong enough. Dodoria and Zarbon are competent, but not too competent. Vegeta has potential, but Frieza keeps him in check through constant threats. What? Because surrounding himself with genuinely powerful people would be too threatening. So he chooses people strong enough to be useful, but weak enough to never truly challenge him. This is what we call strategic encirclement. Insecure leaders surround themselves with weaker people to always appear the strongest in the room. Genuinely confident leaders surround themselves with brilliant people because they don't feel threatened by the excellence of others. Frieza is definitely the first type. His empire isn't built on strength, it's built on weakness strategically organized around him. Now for something fascinating about memory and trauma. Frieza likely has distorted memories of his own past. People with pathological narcissism often rewrite their own stories to fit the narrative they need to believe. Frieza likely has moments from his own childhood or development that he has completely erased or distorted because they don't fit the image he's constructed. Perhaps there were moments where he was vulnerable, where he cried, where he needed help. But these memories are so inconsistent with Lord Frieza that his mind literally edited them. Not consciously, he's not deliberately lying to himself. The brain does this automatically as a protective mechanism. It's called selective dissociative amnesia, and is common in complex, unresolved trauma. Let's now explore how Frieza deals with the concept of limits. A limit is when someone says no to you, when someone establishes that there are things you can't do, places where your power ends. And Frieza? He literally doesn't recognize the existence of limits. Any imposed limit is seen as a personal challenge that must be destroyed. When the Namekians refuse to hand over the Dragon Balls, Frieza doesn't respect their choice. When Goku asks him to stop, Frieza doesn't consider it a valid request. When the universe itself seems to conspire against him through events beyond his control, he flies into a rage. What? Because recognizing limits would mean recognizing that he is not omnipotent, and that is psychologically impossible for him. This creates a constant conflict with reality. Reality imposes limits, physically, temporally, biologically. But Frieza doesn't accept this. So he lives in constant war not only with individuals, but with the very nature of existence. He wants to be an exception to the fundamental rules of the universe. And when the universe inevitably proves he is no exception, he interprets this not as information about reality, but as a personal offense. Let's now talk about something that deeply connects with moral development. Frieza is stuck in what Lawrence Kohlberg would call the pre-conventional stage of morality. This is the stage where morality is defined solely by what I can do without being punished, and what gives me reward. There is no consideration for principles, for other beings, for the greater good. Young children naturally fall into this stage and gradually evolve. But Frieza? He's permanently stuck there. Not because he's not intelligent, he clearly is. But because moral evolution requires empathy, and empathy requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is the only unforgivable sin in his belief system. So he's intellectually sophisticated but morally childish. It's a particularly dangerous combination. Now, something that will make you look at the fight scenes differently. When Frieza is losing, he often resorts to increasingly desperate and dishonorable strategies. He attacks from behind, feigns surrender, uses hostages, begs for mercy, and then attacks when his opponent lets his guard down. Why these patterns? For Frieza, there is no concept of honor or fair play. These concepts require recognizing the opponent as an equal, as deserving of a certain respect even in conflict. But Frieza is incapable of this. The opponent is not an equal, he's an insect. And you don't care about being honorable to insects. You just crush them as efficiently as possible. So any tactic, no matter how low, is justified in his mind. But here's the irony, these tactics always fail. What? Because they come from desperation, not from real strategy. They're last-minute improvisations by someone who never developed real adaptive skills because they always relied on brute force. It's like someone who always had money and never learned practical skills. The moment the money runs out, they're completely lost. Let's now explore something about Frieza's voice, both literally and metaphorically. Notice how he speaks, calm, controlled, almost gentle at times. There's a disturbing dissonance between tone and content. He might be describing how he's going to torture someone with the same tone someone would use to describe a beautiful garden. Why this dissociation between form and content? Because calm is just another layer of armor. If he were constantly yelling and raging, that would be honest, it would be genuine emotion leaking out. But artificial calm demonstrates absolute control over outward expression, regardless of what's going on internally. It's just another way to maintain the illusion that he's always in control, always unfazed, always superior. But pay attention, when he loses that calm, when he starts screaming and despairing, it's infinitely more revealing. These are the moments when the truth leaks through the cracks. And they always happen when he's confronting something he can't control, can't manipulate, can't easily destroy. It's when his control slips that you see who's really underneath. Now let's take a strategic break because what comes next is crucial. If you're enjoying this in-depth content on anime psychology, if it's making you see the characters and real people around you in a completely different way, then you need to subscribe to this channel now. Why? Because analyses like this don't exist anywhere else. While everyone else is just talking about fighting power, and who would win against whom, we are diving into the depths of human psychology through anime. And if you don't subscribe, you'll miss out on upcoming analyses that will literally change how you understand human behavior. Think about it, how many times have you encountered someone who acts like Frieza? Someone at school, at work, even in your family? Someone who always needs to be in control, who doesn't accept being contradicted, who punishes any challenge, who makes others walk on eggshells around them. And you didn't know how to understand or deal with it, right? That's the value of this channel. We're not just talking about anime characters. We're giving you real psychological tools to understand the world around you. Each video is a psychology masterclass disguised as an anime analysis. And you're getting access to it for free. So click the subscribe button now, activate the bell so you don't miss any analysis, and leave a like so this content can reach more people who need to understand these patterns. Because psychological knowledge can literally save you from destructive relationships, toxic environments, and people who will drain your energy and destroy you like Frieza destroys planets. Sign up now. Let's continue this journey together, uncovering the most fascinating minds in anime. Now we'll delve into the deepest and most disturbing territory of all. How Frieza represents psychological patterns that exist in real power structures in our world. This goes beyond just anime villain. Frieza is a case study in how dictators, toxic leaders, and systematic abusers function psychologically. And understanding this can literally save you from dangerous situations in real life. Let's start with something fundamental, the pyramid of power that Frieza built. He stands alone at the absolute top. Below him is his father, but even this relationship is more of a veiled competition than a real family. Next comes the elite, Ginyu Force, Zarbon, Dodoria, then the common soldiers, and at the base are the conquered civilizations. This structure is not accidental, it is psychologically calculated. Why does this pyramid work? Because each level has someone below it to oppress, so each level has an investment in maintaining the system. Zarbon may feel superior to Dodoria, Dodoria feels superior to the rank and file, and the rank and file feels superior to the conquered civilizations. No one questions the system because everyone has something to lose. Except, of course, those at the absolute bottom who have nothing, and these are systematically destroyed when they try to rebel. This is exactly how real dictatorships work. It's not just the dictator holding power, it's an entire structure of people who marginally benefit from the system and therefore defend it. Frieza understands this intuitively. He gives his subordinates enough power to feel special, but never so much that they threaten him. It's social manipulation on a galactic scale. Let's now explore something rarely discussed, the role of the witness in Frieza's system. Why does he perform public executions? Why does he demonstrate his power in front of others? Because he's creating what psychologists call vicarious trauma, or observation trauma. When you see someone destroyed for defying Frieza, it creates fear in you even without you being directly attacked. It's both brilliant and terrifying. He doesn't need to torture millions individually to control them. He tortures a few strategically, makes sure everyone sees, and the fear spreads exponentially. Each witness becomes a trauma carrier who passes on that fear through warnings, stories, and cautious behavior. It's self-replicating psychological terrorism. And there's an even more sinister aspect. Frieza frequently forces people to watch atrocities. He won't let you look away, won't let you run away. You're forced to witness. Why? Because he wants the image to be seared into your mind, to become a permanent part of your psyche. He wants to plant seeds of fear so deep that they become part of who you are. Let's now talk about something crucial, Frieza's relationship with the word betrayal. For him, any act of autonomy is betrayal. Vegeta wanting to be stronger? Betrayal. A planet refusing to surrender? Betrayal. Someone trying to survive when he has decided they must die? Betrayal. Why is everything interpreted as a personal betrayal? Because in Frieza's twisted psychology, Everything and everyone exists only in relation to him. The entire universe should function according to his will. So when something doesn't work that way, it's not just a neutral event, it's a personal offense. It's the universe betraying him. This pathological centralization creates constant paranoia because, by definition, the universe doesn't revolve around a single person. So he's constantly being betrayed by a reality that refuses to conform to his unrealistic expectations. This connects with something you need to understand about people like Frieza in real life. They live in a different universe than you. Literally. The reality they perceive is so distorted by their psychological defenses that it's fundamentally incompatible with the reality healthy people inhabit. And that's why you can't reason with them, you can't explain to them. You're speaking different languages, inhabiting different universes. Let's now explore the concept of legacy and how Frieza relates to it. Most people, on some level, worry about how they'll be remembered, what they'll leave behind. But Frieza? His legacy is terror. It's destruction. It's absence, planets that no longer exist, extinct races, erased civilizations. He's not creating anything, he's just destroying. What? Because creation requires vulnerability. When you create something, art, a relationship, a community, you're putting something of yourself into the world that can be rejected, criticized, destroyed. It's inherently risky. But destruction? Destruction is safe. You're in absolute control. There's no risk of rejection because nothing is being offered, only taken away. Frieza chose the safe path of simply destroying because creating would require courage he doesn't have. And herein lies the tragic irony. His legacy of terror is doomed to fail. Because terror cannot survive without the source of terror. The moment Frieza dies, or is definitively defeated, the entire empire crumbles. There is no real structure, no system that functions without him, nothing of value that survives his absence. He spent a lifetime building an empire that is fundamentally unstable and temporary. Compare this to Goku. What is Goku's legacy? Inspired people, warriors who grew under his influence, life-changing friendships, a family he protected. Even if Goku disappeared, these things would still exist, would still have an impact. That is the real legacy. Frieza only has the memory of terror, and even that eventually fades because no one wants to preserve memories of trauma. Let's now talk about a specific pattern Frieza demonstrates, the escalation of absurdity. When something doesn't work, instead of changing strategy, he simply does more of the same thing. Couldn't win at 50% power? Use 70%. Still didn't work? Use 100%. Still failed? Return to mechanical form. Failed again? Train to get stronger and try again. Same strategy, just more. This is what Einstein supposedly called insanity, doing the same thing over and over again expecting different results. But why do smart people like Frieza do this? Because changing strategy would require admitting the original strategy was wrong. And admitting error is impossible for the narcissistic ego. So the only option is the same strategy, only more intense, more extreme, more desperate. You see this in real people all the time. The parent who uses physical punishment to control their child doesn't work, so they punish even harder. The boss who controls through fear loses employees, so they become even more controlling. The person who manipulates relationships loses people, so they manipulate even more intensely. It's a destructive cycle where the solution is always more of the problem. Let's now explore something about illusory control. Frieza has an empire, soldiers, and the power to destroy planets. That sounds like a lot of control, right? But it's an illusion. Real control would be being at peace with oneself regardless of external circumstances. Real control would be not needing external power to feel complete. Frieza has power over everything except himself. He is a slave to his own fears, his own compulsions, his own traumas. So who's really in control? Not Frieza. It's the ghosts of his past, the unresolved fears, the unprocessed traumas. These are the true rulers, and Frieza is merely the puppet executing orders that come from the depths of his wounded psyche. He thinks he's in control because he confuses external control with internal control. But these are completely different things. Goku has much less power in the sense of control over others, but he has much more actual control because he actively chooses how to respond to the world. He's not driven by unconscious fears. He acts according to consciously chosen values. That is genuine control. Frieza is reactive, always reacting to threats, always defending, always trying to prove a point. Reactivity is the opposite of control. Let's talk now about something deeply sad. Frieza has never experienced genuine joy. Think about it. In all his scenes, is there a single moment of true joy? Not sadistic satisfaction, not a sense of power, but joy? That light, expansive feeling of being connected to something greater than oneself? It doesn't exist. Not a single moment. And that is the ultimate tragedy. He has infinite power, infinite wealth, control over galaxies, and yet he doesn't have a single second of real joy. Because joy requires openness, requires vulnerability, requires genuine connection. And he has cut off all these avenues. So he is trapped in a kind of misery that no power can alleviate. It is the deepest poverty possible. Emotional poverty, poverty of soul, poverty of meaning. You can have everything materially and be miserable. You can have nothing and be profoundly happy. Frieza proves the former, Goku proves the latter. And that's one of the most valuable lessons Dragon Ball offers if you look beyond the fights and explosions. It's not about power, it's about what you do with power. It's not about strength, it's about what you protect with strength. It's not about dominating, it's about connecting. Let's now explore one last crucial aspect. The question, what does Frieza really want? He says he wants power, he wants dominance, he wants immortality. But these are means, not ends. What does he really want, deep down in his wounded soul? Probably something he's never had and can never admit he wants. To be loved unconditionally. To be accepted completely. To be safe, to be vulnerable. But this desire is so buried, so denied, so covered by layers and layers of defenses that it has reached the point where he can no longer even recognize it. So he chases substitutes, power instead of love, control instead of security, terror instead of respect. And none of these substitutes satisfy, so he needs more and more and more endlessly, chasing something he will never reach because he is looking in the wrong place. If someone offered Frieza genuine love, unconditional acceptance, real emotional security, he would probably destroy them. Because accepting that would mean admitting he needed it all along, that his entire life was built on a lie, that he wasted entire lifetimes chasing the wrong things. And that truth would be more destructive to him than any Super Saiyan. Now let's connect all this with something you urgently need to understand. How to identify and protect yourself from Frieza in real life. Because they exist. In positions of power in companies, in family relationships, in social circles, even in friendships. And if you don't recognize the signs, you can end up trapped in a toxic dynamic before you even realize what's happening. First sign, the person makes you feel like you have to walk on eggshells around them. You never know exactly what will trigger an explosive reaction. One day something is acceptable, the next day the same thing results in fury. This creates constant anxiety where you're always monitoring your own behavior, always trying to predict the person's mood. This is intentional, it keeps you off balance and controllable. Second sign, the person never takes responsibility for mistakes. It's always someone else's fault, circumstances, or the universe conspiring against them. And most importantly, when you make a mistake or something they define as a mistake, it's unforgivable. But when they make a mistake, there are a million justifications. This asymmetry reveals that there's no real justice system, only the person's convenience. Third sign, the person uses information you shared vulnerably as a weapon against you later. You shared an insecurity, a fear, a trauma. And then, in an argument or when you challenge them, this information is thrown in your face. This demonstrates a complete inability to respect another person's vulnerability. And worse, it demonstrates that the person was archiving this information specifically for future use as ammunition. Fourth sign, the person isolates you from other sources of support. It can be subtle, small comments about your friends or family, creating situations where you have to choose between them and others, making you feel guilty about spending time with others. Or it can be obvious, direct prohibitions, threats, ultimatums. Either way, the goal is the same, to cut off your connections so that you depend exclusively on them. Fifth sign, there's a frightening discrepancy between their public image and their private reality. In public, a person may be charming, polite, even generous. But in private, with those they have power over, they're completely different, cruel, mean, and controlling. If you point out this discrepancy, they'll make you feel crazy for imagining things or exaggerating. This is classic gaslighting. Sixth sign, the person has a history of broken relationships where they are always the victim. All their exes are crazy, all their former employees were incompetent, all their former friends betrayed them. If all the people in someone's past are villains in their narrative, they are probably the real villain. But they will never admit it because it requires self-reflection they are incapable of. Seventh sign, extreme conditional love or approval. You're amazing when you do what someone wants, but instantly become trash when you disagree or set boundaries. There's no consistency of basic respect regardless of agreement. You're only good as long as you're helpful or submissive. This creates a toxic dependency where you're constantly trying to regain approval that was arbitrarily withdrawn. Eighth sign: the person punishes vulnerability. If you cry, they ridicule you. If you admit fear, they exploit it. If you ask for help, they use it as evidence of your weakness. This creates an environment where you have to constantly be in armor, always defending yourself, never able to relax or be genuine. It's constant emotional exhaustion. Ninth sign: normalization of abusive behavior. The person does something obviously problematic, but presents it as normal or even necessary. I only yell because you provoke me. I only control you because you can't make good decisions. I only criticize you because I want you to improve. They take abusive behavior and repackage it as love, concern, or logic. 10th sign, and perhaps the most important: your gut is screaming that something is wrong, but you can't quite put your finger on it. You constantly feel bad, but you can't pinpoint obvious abuse. This is because sophisticated abusers operate in gray areas of plausible feasibility, intentional ambiguity, subtle manipulation. Trust your gut. If something feels persistently wrong, it probably is wrong. Now, how do you protect yourself from people like this? First and foremost, set boundaries and keep them. People like Frieza constantly test boundaries, looking for where you'll give in. If you give in once, they've learned that pressure works and will use it endlessly. You have to be willing to say no and deal with the consequences, which often include anger, manipulation, or attempts at punishment. Second, document everything. If you're in a situation where you need to deal with someone like this, work, family, legal situation, keep records of interactions. Emails, messages, witnesses when possible. Because these people will lie, distort, and rewrite history. Having objective documentation is crucial. Third, maintain your support network. Don't isolate yourself. Don't cut off contact with people who genuinely love you. These are your reality anchors when the person is trying to distort your perception. And they are your rescue system when you finally decide to leave. Fourth, don't try to fix the person. You're not their therapist, and even therapists have enormous difficulty with narcissistic personalities. You can't love someone enough to change them, you can't be patient enough, you can't be perfect enough. Change has to come from within, and often it simply doesn't. Accept that. Fifth, plan your exit. If you're in a relationship or situation with someone like this, start planning how to leave safely. Don't announce your plans, don't give empty ultimatums. Plan quietly, build resources, and when you're ready, leave. And then keep your distance. These people are experts at manipulating you back into the relationship. Sixth, seek professional help. Therapy is crucial to processing the trauma of interacting with people like this, to rebuilding your sense of self, which has likely been eroded, and to learning healthier patterns. There's no shame in this. It's strength, it's self-care, it's necessary. Let's now talk about something you need to understand deeply: why you might have attracted or become trapped with someone like this. It's not your fault the person is abusive, but understanding your own patterns helps prevent recurrence. Often, people who end up in relationships with narcissists share some common characteristics. You may have been raised in an environment where love was conditional, where you had to earn affection through performance or obedience. This programmed you to accept conditional love as normal. Or you may have learned that your needs aren't important, that you should always put others first. Or you may have been taught that conflict is terrible and should be avoided at all costs, so you constantly give in to keep the peace. These programmings aren't your fault, you absorbed them from your environment. But recognizing them is the first step to changing them. You can reprogram, you can learn that healthy love is unconditional, that your needs matter, that healthy conflict is a normal part of relationships. But it requires conscious work. Now let's connect this back to Frieza. Why is it important to understand his psychology so deeply? Because Frieza isn't just an anime character, he's an archetype. He represents a specific pattern of human dysfunction that manifests in similar ways in different cultures, in different contexts, throughout history. Dictators, abusers, pathological narcissists. They all share fundamental characteristics that Frieza demonstrates in exaggerated and visible ways. Studying Frieza is studying this pattern in a safe, distanced way. You can clearly see the dynamics without being emotionally involved, without being under pressure, without being in danger. And then you can learn to recognize these same dynamics when they appear in more subtle ways in real life. It's like a vaccine, controlled exposure to the pattern to develop immunity. And here's the crucial thing: understanding isn't justifying. Everything we've explored about Frieza's trauma, about how he got to where he is, doesn't excuse his behavior. He's still responsible for his choices. Understanding provides context, not absolution. And this distinction is vital because you can empathize with someone's pain while still maintaining firm boundaries against their abusive behavior. You can recognize that someone is acting from a place of deep trauma and still say, "But that doesn't give you the right to treat me like that." These two truths coexist. Empathy doesn't mean tolerating abuse. Compassion doesn't mean having no boundaries. You can have an open heart and a strong backbone simultaneously. Let's now explore something that will completely change your perspective. What if Frieza could be saved? Not in the sense of forgiven, but in the sense of genuinely transformed? Would it be possible? And what does this teach us about the potential for change in real people who exhibit similar destructive patterns? The uncomfortable truth is, yes, it would technically be possible. But it would require something Frieza will likely never make, a conscious choice to look honestly at himself and accept full responsibility for who he's become. Let's break down what this transformational journey would require, because it will give you deep insights into genuine psychological change versus superficial change. The first step would be what we call a moment of absolute clarity. This is a moment when all defenses temporarily fall and one sees the naked truth about oneself. For Frieza, this would be seeing not only that he lost fights, but that he wasted an entire existence chasing empty pursuits. That he built an empire of sand. That he is profoundly, terrifyingly alone and always has been. This moment is devastating. That's why most people do everything to avoid it. Because when you truly see the truth about the years or decades you've wasted, the pain you've caused, the opportunities for genuine connection you've destroyed, it's almost unbearable. The overwhelming temptation is to put up your defenses again, to deny, to rationalize, to fall back into old patterns. Because at least the old patterns are familiar, even if they're miserable. If Frieza could live through this moment and not run from it, the next step would be something called radical grief. He would have to mourn not only what he did but who he could have been. He would have to mourn the child he was before the trauma, the innocence lost, the paths not taken. He would have to feel the full pain of wasted centuries. And here's the cruel thing, you can't skip this stage. You have to feel all of it. For someone like Frieza, who has spent his entire life avoiding any genuine feelings, this would be absolute agony. It would be like someone who has never exercised in their life trying to run a marathon. The emotional muscles simply don't exist. He would have to develop them from scratch and the process would be excruciating. But without this process, there is no real transformation, only cosmetic change. The third step would be what we call identity reconstruction. Remember how we said that Frieza's entire identity is based on being the strongest? Well, he would have to literally figure out who he is without that. It's like waking up one day and no longer knowing your own name. Terrifying. Disorienting. And you would have to sit with that emptiness and gradually, patiently, build a new sense of self based on genuine values, not power or status. This means answering questions like, what do I value regardless of how it makes me look? What do I care about when no one is looking? Who do I want to be versus what do I want to have or look like? For Frieza, these questions probably don't even make sense initially. He'd have to learn a whole new emotional language. The fourth step would be to make amends, not because it will fix what he did, nothing fixes genocide, but because it is a necessary part of taking full responsibility. This means not just saying sorry, but actively working to minimize the ongoing damage of his actions. In Frieza's case, this would be virtually impossible given the scale of destruction. But genuinely trying, even knowing it will never be enough, is a crucial part of the process. Fifth step, and perhaps the most difficult, learning to tolerate not being special. Frieza would have to accept being just another being in the universe. Not superior, not inferior, just existing. With intrinsic value not because he's powerful but simply because he exists. This requires profound humility that goes against every fiber of his programming. Now, why am I explaining all this if Frieza will probably never do it? Because you might know someone on this path. Or you yourself might have smaller patterns that need a similar transformation. And understanding the process helps in both cases. If you know someone genuinely trying to change from narcissistic or abusive patterns, you can assess whether the change is real or performative. Real change involves all of these steps, especially the uncomfortable ones. If someone is jumping straight to "I've changed, now forgive me" without having done the deep work, it's probably not genuine change, just a new form of manipulation. And if you are recognizing problematic patterns in yourself, maybe not on the level of Frieza, but patterns of control, of avoiding vulnerability, of protecting ego at all costs, this script shows the real work needed. It's not a matter of simply deciding to be better. It's a deep, painful, and time-consuming process of deconstruction and complete reconstruction. Let's now talk about something related but slightly different: the difference between redemption and consequences. Often in pop culture, there's this idea that if a villain has a moment of kindness or heroic sacrifice, it somehow cancels out or balances out previous atrocities. But real life doesn't work that way. Frieza could have 1,000 heroic moments, and it wouldn't bring back the trillions of lives he destroyed. Personal transformation doesn't erase the consequences of past actions. You can genuinely change and still have to live with the weight of what you did. And part of genuine transformation is accepting that, not trying to negotiate, but now I'm good, so it's all right. This is important to understand because sometimes we see abusers making nice gestures, and victims are pressured to forgive because, look, they've changed. But real change doesn't require immediate forgiveness from victims. Victims have the right to maintain distance indefinitely, regardless of how genuine the abuser's transformation is. Forgiveness is the victim's choice, not their duty. Now let's explore something fascinating. Why some villains can make this transformation journey and others can't. Vegeta can eventually. Piccolo can. Even Majin Buu can to some extent. But Frieza? Apparently not. What? The crucial difference seems to be opening to connection. Vegeta had Bulma and Trunks who broke through his defenses. Piccolo had Gohan. Buu had Mr. Satan. They all experienced genuine connection that created cracks in their psychological armor, allowing light to enter. But Frieza? He systematically destroys any possibility of genuine connection before it can begin to affect him. When Goku extends his hand, both literally and metaphorically, Frieza immediately betrays him. He can't even briefly experience what it would be like to accept that offer. The fear of vulnerability is so overwhelming that he reacts by instantly destroying the possibility of connection. It's like someone dying of thirst but refusing to drink water because they don't trust the source. This teaches us something crucial. Transformation rarely happens in a vacuum. It usually requires at least one person willing to continue seeing the human beneath the monster, to continue offering connection even when repeatedly rejected. But, and this is important, that person shouldn't do so at the expense of their own mental health. It's no one's responsibility to sacrifice themselves trying to save someone who doesn't want to be saved. There's something called compassion fatigue, which happens when you emotionally invest yourself in trying to help someone who constantly rejects help and falls back into destructive patterns. Eventually, for self-preservation, you must set boundaries and accept that you can't save someone from themselves. You can hold the door open, but you can't carry them through it. Let's now talk about neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change and form new connections. The good news? Brains can change at any age. The bad news? The older you get and the more entrenched the patterns, the harder it becomes. Frieza likely lived centuries repeating the same neural patterns. These pathways in his brain are 8-lane highways. Creating new patterns would be like carving trails in the jungle with your fingernails. Technically possible, but extremely difficult. But here's something hopeful. Even small changes create momentum. If Frieza could make one different choice, genuinely different, not tactical, it would set a neural precedent. Oh, it's possible to act differently and not die. This experience would make the second different choice slightly easier. And the third a little easier. Eventually, new patterns would form. The problem is arriving at that first choice, because it requires an absolute leap of faith from someone who's spent their entire life learning that faith is weakness. It's like asking someone with an extreme fear of heights to bungee jump before working through their fear. Possible? Maybe. Likely? Not very likely. So we return to the original question. Can Frieza be saved? Answer. He can save himself, if he's willing to do the hardest work imaginable, work that goes against every instinct he's ever developed. Can anyone help him with this? Only marginally. They can offer support, they can create the conditions, but the real work only he can do. And this is true for anyone struggling with deep-seated destructive patterns. Other people can support, they can love, they can wait. But the choice to genuinely do the work, to face the pain, to rebuild from the inside out, that choice is fundamentally individual. No one can make it for you. Now let's close this in-depth analysis with the most important question of all. What does Frieza's story teach us about ourselves? Because in the end, this was never just an analysis of an anime villain. It was always about understanding fundamental human patterns that exist in all of us to varying degrees. The uncomfortable truth is, we all have an inner Frieza. Not in the sense of being genocidal, but in the sense of having those parts of us that want absolute control, that fear vulnerability, that prefer power over connection when we're scared. The difference between us and Frieza isn't that these parts don't exist in us, it's that, hopefully, we don't let these parts rule our entire lives. Let's be honest, have you ever been afraid to be vulnerable and then verbally attacked someone to defend yourself? Have you ever felt threatened by someone else's success and had the urge to belittle them? Have you ever chosen control over trust because trust felt too risky? If you're human, you've probably done all of these things to some degree. The question isn't, do I have these tendencies? The question is, what do I do with these tendencies? Do you acknowledge them and work on them? Or do you deny them and let them grow in the shadows? Do you apologize when they make you hurt someone? Or do you justify and rationalize like Frieza does? This is the line that separates growth from stagnation, connection from isolation, meaningful life from empty existence. And this line is crossed through thousands of small daily choices. Every time you choose to be vulnerable even when afraid, you are distancing yourself from the Frieza pattern. Every time you admit mistakes instead of blaming others, you are building something different. Every time you celebrate others' successes even when envious, you are strengthening healthier emotional muscles. Let's now talk about something crucial to your personal journey: self-compassion versus self-indulgence. Self-compassion is recognizing, I have these tendencies because I've been hurt, because I've learned unhealthy patterns, because I'm afraid. It's having empathy for yourself while still taking responsibility for change. Self-indulgence is, I have these tendencies, so it's okay for me to continue acting this way because it's not my fault. Frieza is trapped in something that isn't even self-indulgence, it's complete denial. But many people oscillate between self-indulgence, my wounds give me the right to hurt others, and self-condemnation, I'm a terrible person and don't deserve anything good. Neither of these extremes helps. The middle path, self-compassion with accountability, is where real transformation happens. And here's something you need to deeply engrave: having problematic patterns doesn't make you an irreducibly bad person. It makes you a human being with work to do. The difference between you and villains like Frieza isn't perfection, it's direction. Are you moving toward greater emotional health, greater connection, greater authenticity? Even if it's slowly, even if it's with stumbles? Then you're on the right track. Frieza is stagnant, stuck, spinning in circles, repeating the same patterns endlessly. You don't need to be perfect, you need to be in motion. Progress, not perfection. Direction, not destination. Growth, not arrival. These are the concepts that separate tragedy from hope. Now let's connect this to something practical. How do you apply this knowledge of Frieza's psychology in your daily life? First, develop what I call your inner Frieza detector. When you feel the urge to control something because you're afraid, pause. Ask yourself, is this a genuine need, or is my inner Frieza reacting to a perceived threat? When you feel the need to prove your superiority, pause. Ask yourself, am I trying to grow or am I trying to hide insecurity? This kind of non-judgmental self-observation is revolutionary. You're not condemning yourself for having these impulses, you're simply noticing them. And by noticing, you create space between impulse and action. In that space you can choose differently. This is the superpower Frieza never developed. The ability to observe yourself and choose response instead of just reacting. Second practical use. When you identify outer Frieza, someone exhibiting these patterns around you, this knowledge protects you. You don't take it personally when they attack because you understand they're reacting from a place of deep wounds, not responding to who you truly are. This doesn't mean tolerating abuse. It means understanding context while maintaining firm boundaries. You can have compassion for someone's pain and still say, but you can't treat me like that. These two things aren't contradictory. You can understand why the scorpion stings and still walk away from it. Wisdom is seeing clearly without losing compassion, but also without sacrificing your own boundaries and well-being. Third practical use. This analysis gives you language for things you felt but couldn't articulate. How many times have you felt something was wrong in an interaction or relationship but couldn't explain it? Now you have concepts like compensatory grandiosity, bonding trauma, psychological projection, and moral disengagement. Language is power because it allows you to think more clearly about experiences. Let's now talk about something profoundly important: the role of conscious witness in social transformation. By understanding these patterns, you become able to witness not only within yourself but within broader structures, companies, communities, even nations. You can identify when leaders are operating in a Frieza pattern. You can recognize when systems are structured to protect the fragile egos of those in power rather than serving the common good. This makes you a more informed citizen, a more conscious community member, and a more effective participant in creating positive change. Because you're no longer being manipulated by rhetoric that appeals to primal fears. You see through the tactics, recognize the patterns, and can consciously resist. And perhaps most importantly, you can teach a different next generation. Whether you have children, nieces and nephews, students, or younger people in your life, You can help them develop emotional intelligence that breaks destructive cycles. You can model healthy vulnerability, genuine responsibility, and authentic connection. You can be the kind of presence that creates cracks in their armor before those armors become prisons. Each person who does this work creates ripples. You change, so your interactions change, so the people around you are exposed to different patterns, so they have the possibility to choose differently. It's not the dramatic salvation of a single heroic person. It's a gradual transformation through thousands of better choices spreading through social networks like water seeping through soil. Let's return to Frieza one last time. His greatest tragedy isn't that he lost fights. It's that he never truly lived. He existed, he accumulated, he dominated. But he never experienced real connection, genuine joy, inner peace, the deep satisfaction of being fully himself with another person. He had everything materially and nothing that truly matters. Don't be Frieza. Not in the obvious sense of not being genocidal, I assume you're already on this page. But in the more subtle sense, don't sacrifice connection for control. Don't trade vulnerability for the appearance of strength. Don't waste your precious, one and only life building an empty empire while your heart withers from neglect. You have one life. One. And it will pass quickly, much faster than you can imagine right now. In the end, you won't remember how many times you won, how many times you proved something, how many times you were right. You will remember moments of genuine connection. Risks of vulnerability that paid off. Times you chose love over fear. Frieza shows us what happens when you consistently choose the opposite. And it's tragic. Don't be that tragedy. Be the different story. Be the person who does the hard work of being genuinely themselves, of connecting authentically, of growing courageously. And you know what? You don't have to be perfect at this. You just have to keep trying. Every day you wake up and choose again, will I build walls or bridges today? Will I react with fear or respond with love? Will I protect my ego or nurture my soul? Choice by choice, day by day, you are writing the story of your life. Make it a story worth telling. But wait, the story doesn't end here. You've just delved deeply into Frieza's psychology, but there's another Dragon Ball character who represents the complete psychological opposite, and understanding this contrast will blow your mind. I'm talking about Goku, and not in the superficial way everyone talks about. I'll reveal how his psychology is the perfect answer to every pathology we've seen in Frieza, and how you can apply Goku's psychological principles to transform your own life. You'll discover why Goku's naivete is actually deep emotional wisdom that most people take decades of therapy to achieve. You'll understand how he developed psychological resilience that allows him to face trauma without becoming traumatized. And you'll learn specific techniques based on his mindset that you can use today to start living with more freedom, joy, and authenticity. This next video will completely change how you view not only Goku, but what's possible for you psychologically. So click now on the video that's appearing on your screen. Don't put it off, because this knowledge is exactly the antidote you need after exploring the dark depths of Frieza's mind. See you there. And remember, keep growing, keep connecting, keep choosing courage over fear. You can do it.